Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was January 28th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Molt Cara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Woo, there is so much to talk about in today's document. It's one that I think is really exciting for a lot of reasons. Okay, first of all, let's source it. The sender is Violant, the queen. At the top of the letter, it says La Reina. The recipient is someone whose title is Vescomte de Roda, the Viscount of Roda. Joan has been in Barcelona for 9 days now, and the two of them are really into their rule. So we had this period of a couple weeks in early January where things were looking dicey. Violant was in Barcelona, Joan was in Granollers, but now we're starting to see things really going on a roll. And by the way, you might hear a certain cat noise appearing in today's podcast because I've got one of my kittens' shadow here at the desk, and she tends to pipe in. And if I'm saying something really great and she happens to make a cat noise, I'm not going to re-record it because there's just a kind of, joy to the spontaneity, and also you sometimes can't replicate the way that you talk about something in the tone that you did. It'll sound false. So, all right, might have some cat audience participation here, but there she is. Hopefully you got to hear that. Okay. So they are into their period of governance. They're off to the races. We've seen in the last 2 days that they're starting to reposition a lot of the portfolio holdings of Sibylla de Fortia. And now we've got a document that, in my mind, just opens up a lot of really fun questions. First of all, the recipient is not just some random viscount. The Viscount of Roda is one of Violant's most trusted correspondents. The Viscountess, the Viscount of Roda's wife, is someone who Violant sometimes shares really personal details. Like in a different year, a little bit later on, Violant writes to the Viscountess of Roda about what's going on as she's pregnant. And she tells her in a letter that's copied into the chancery, I've been barfing a lot. She uses the term grand vomit. And so she includes these really interesting personal tidbits that I think is one of the things that makes Violant such a fascinating person to study. And I really have to thank Dawn Bratch Prince, who in the early 2000s into the 2010s wrote some wonderful articles and one monograph about Violant de Bar and highlighted some of these letters that I talk about when I refer to things other than what we're looking at in the document of the day. So I'll put a link to the article that Dawn Bratch Prince wrote, and that really just stuck with me. That one letter where Violant is writing to the Viscountess of Roda with that musing. So here we've got a letter to the Viscount de Roda, but part of the sourcing is just, well, who are these people? And the Viscount of Roda is really easy to research. That is Ramon de Perellos. Ramon de Perellos is one of the major actors in the late 14th century story of the diplomacy conducted by the Crown of Aragon. You see Ramon de Perellos representing the monarch of the Crown of Aragon in a variety of settings. And I say the monarch because he did this for Pere, Joan, and Martí. And Ramon de Perellos has been described as, quote, an essential statesman, unquote, by another one of the foremost historians of Violant and Joan right now, Yedo Ruiz Dominguez. So I'll put a link to her article in the webpage for this episode too. Ramon de Perellos, a very capable diplomat and official, and Pere had sent him to do negotiations of different kinds in France. At one point later on, Ramon de Perellos is in charge, it seems, of a small fleet of ships for Pope Clement VII, the Avignon Pope. And so he's really good. It's also possible, I'm still researching this, it's also possible that Ramon de Perellos was the person who Violant met in France ahead of the marriage to Joan. It could be that Ramon de Perellos was one of the people that negotiated the marriage between Joan and Violant. So it's possible that when we see Violant writing to Ramon de Perellos here in 1387, she's writing to somebody who she's had a chance to develop a lot of trust with and a friendship. Also, there was this moment in 1381 when Sibylla de Fortia got really antagonistic toward Violant, and basically the short story is Ramon de Perellos wound up kind of in the middle due to some family ties he had with someone who was close to Violant, his sister-in-law actually. And Ramon de Perellos at that point took the side of Joan and Violant, and in a way turned his back on King Pere because of this issue that was instigated by Sibylla de Fortia. Essentially an accusation about Ramon's sister-in-law being an improper person, and basically demanding that Violant dismiss her from her role as a lady in Violant's, as Duchess of Girona in Violant's household. So Yedo Ruiz Dominguez does a great job explaining all this. I have to give you a super short version. All of this is just to say that in this letter, what we have before we even get to the content of the letter is this high level of trust, a history between these people. And now, when we get into the content of the letter, we see, oh my goodness, this is Violant informing Ramon de Perellos, Viscount of Roda, that the King of Navarre has died, which is something that is super revealing about the way news travels, because it's weird to me that when a king dies in the neighboring kingdom, someone of the stature in diplomatic circles of the Viscount of Roda, Ramon de Perellos, wouldn't have already known. But maybe this is more of a rhetorical thing, and Violant is simply setting this groundwork saying, you know this already, but, because of this is the reason why this other stuff is happening in the letter. And what's the other stuff? Well, it's also general and vague. So Violant is talking about there's these affairs and things that are happening and messages, and I want the information, and I'm delivering you information, and there's new things happening, and there's hardly anything at all specific in this letter. The only thing that is specific in this letter, it's not a long letter, but still, there's enough lines, like, 8 lines or something, to have something specific. And, well, what's that? It's the name of someone. Guillaume de Copons. Guillaume de, or I want to say that in French, but it's probably Copons in the Catalan pronunciation. Guillaume de Copons is someone who appears again and again as a trusted go-between for both Joan and Violant. Sometimes I've seen Guillaume de Copons appear as someone who's trying to get a highly valued manuscript from the Duc de Berry in France. And it's Guillaume de Copons who's in the letter that is saying, hey, we'd like this manuscript. Guillaume de Copons is coming to get it, or is there with this letter. So he is the person that shows up to get the thing or to get the information. And I think what's going on in this letter is a wonderful window into the way that they operated. They're not going to necessarily write down all of the juicy details in a letter for a couple reasons. The letter could be intercepted, could maybe be taken the wrong way. I mean, now in our time, how many of us have gotten into trouble when you send an email and the person receiving it is reading it in a different way than you intended it? Just showed my age there. Maybe a text message. You've had that experience. So when you send a person to deliver more detailed information, that person can be equipped to answer for you and clarify the tone, the situation, reveal secrets that maybe are just even too dangerous, even under the secret seal, to send in a letter. And by the way, today we're looking at a register that is the secret seal level of correspondence. So even with the secret seal, this letter is showing us that there needed to be a person who would be the actual bearer of the information, and that this letter is sort of like a letter of introduction or just setting the groundwork. It's highly possible that Guillaume de Copons had visited the Viscount of Roda on behalf of Joan and Violant prior to this. So it doesn't sound to me like he's being introduced for the first time here, but maybe he is. I'm not sure. So this document is just one that I think is revealing about how the exchange of information happened between elites at this time. One last thing I want to mention about Ramon de Perellos, and we'll probably see at least a few letters involving him, the Viscount of Roda, in the year ahead here. But I just want to mention there's something that is very touching about him and his connection to Joan and Violant. When Joan died, it was a sudden death. And it happened during a hunting trip. And when somebody dies suddenly at this time and in this culture, their soul cannot go directly to heaven because they didn't get last rites before they died. So a sudden death will automatically send you to purgatory. I mean, unless you're going to hell. But if you're not going to hell, you have to, because you didn't get last rites, spend at least some time in purgatory. There was a legend at this time that the entrance to purgatory could be found in the physical world at a particular site in Ireland. And even though Dante puts purgatory at the southern hemisphere of the earth, by the time we get to the late 14th century, it's very common to see people referring to the entrance of purgatory, at least, as in Ireland. When Joan dies, Ramon de Perellos decides he's going to go to Ireland in order to encounter Joan's soul and to bring back the message that Joan is going to be moving beyond purgatory and into heaven. And he writes this as a literary piece. So he goes to Ireland. Like, he really takes the journey. So he really physically goes there. And then he writes about it. And we have this text. It's survived. And so you can read about this guy, this person receiving this letter, going to Ireland, encountering Joan's soul in purgatory, and then coming back to tell the tale. So it's an interesting text. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job. Because remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes. And listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Shadow also wishes you a wonderful time for the rest of your day looking at the materials on the webpage at jonathanseyfried.net. Right, Shadow? All right. In the meantime, take care.